MacArthur's warning about Asia echoes something Patton had screamed into the void before his death, that the red tide would not stop at Berlin, that the alliance with Stalin was a devil's bargain history would curse. Though separated by death and distance, their visions collided in the smoking aftermath of World War, two prophets crying out warnings no one wanted to hear. This is the story of what happened next. The spring of 1950 arrives cold in Tokyo. Inside the Daiichi Life Building, General Douglas MacArthur paces before maps that stretch across entire walls. Korea, Manchuria, the vast expanse of China now painted red. The supreme commander of Allied powers in Japan watches an empire crumble and another rise from its ashes. The Soviets will dominate Asia, he tells his staff, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy. Mark my words, what we've won in the Pacific will be lost to Moscow's ambition. The room falls silent. Outside, cherry blossoms fall like snow over a city rebuilt from fire. But MacArthur sees only darkness spreading from the north. The Chinese Civil War has ended with Mao's victory. The Soviet bear now has a dragon ally. Korea stands divided, a knife waiting to be driven into the heart of the free world. MacArthur's warning isn't theoretical. Intelligence reports pile on his desk. Soviet advisors flooding into Beijing. Military equipment crossing borders. Ideological poison seeping into every crack the war had opened. The general understands what others refuse to see. The Second World War never truly ended. It merely changed uniforms. He drafts cables to Washington, his words sharp and urgent. But in the corridors of power, war-weary politicians speak only of peace dividends and demobilization. They've already forgotten what MacArthur knows in his bones, that totalitarianism doesn't surrender. It waits. In the dim light of his office, MacArthur thinks of another general who understood this truth. A man who died 5 years ago in a hospital bed in Heidelberg, his spine shattered, his warnings unheeded. George S. Patton had seen it coming too. December 1945. General George S. Patton lies broken in a German hospital, his body failing but his mind burning with clarity. In the weeks before the accident that would kill him, he'd been writing, speaking, warning anyone who would listen. We fought the wrong enemy, he'd told reporters, journalists, anyone with ears. The words had caused scandal, outrage, calls for his dismissal. But Patton didn't care about politics. He cared about truth as he saw it, raw, unfiltered, dangerous. His letters from that final summer paint a portrait of obsession. The Russians are Mongols, he writes to his wife. They have no regard for human life and are all-out sons of bitches, barbarians, and chronic drunks. The language is crude, the sentiment darker still, but beneath the bile lies strategic calculation. Patton had watched the Red Army pour across Eastern Europe, had seen the savagery, the systematic occupation, the disappearances. In Bavaria, he'd commanded the Third Army through Germany's corps. He'd seen Soviet officers up close, negotiated with them, measured them. Where others saw wartime allies, Patton saw future enemies. His philosophy was simple, brutal. Strike now, while American armies still stand on European soil. Push them back. Don't wait for the next war. His subordinates remember him pacing before maps, cigarette burning between his fingers, pointing at Soviet positions. We can beat them, he'd say. We should beat them. We will have to beat them eventually. Why not now, when we're strong? But Washington had other plans. The alliance held. Patton was silenced, sidelined, then killed by fate or accident on a winter road. His warnings died with him, or so it seemed. Yet his shadow lingers in every Cold War calculation, every containment doctrine, every proxy war. MacArthur, studying his Asian maps in 1950, fights Patton's war in a different theater. The enemy Patton identified now threatens everything MacArthur built in Japan. 2 generals, 2 continents, 1 enemy. MacArthur's Asia and Patton's Europe exist in different worlds, separated by oceans and years. Yet their strategic visions converge on a single terrible point. The Soviet Union cannot be appeased, cannot be trusted, cannot be allowed to expand unchecked. But their methods diverge like roads splitting in a dark forest. MacArthur believes in the long game, rebuilding Japan as a bulwark, containing communism through economic revival and strategic alliances. He sees Asia as a chessboard requiring patience, diplomacy, the careful positioning of pieces over years and decades. His war would be political, economic, fought through Marshall Plans and defense pacts. Patton's approach was fire and blood. No containment, no waiting. He advocated for immediate military action, reorganize the Wehrmacht, point it east, drive to Moscow before winter. His war would have been World War III in 1945, a roll of iron dice while America held nuclear monopoly. Picture the scene if it could have existed. These two titans in a room together, smoke curling between them, maps spread across oak tables, MacArthur, tall and theatrical, speaking of Japanese democracy and Asian reconstruction. Patton, compact and coiled, pounding the table and demanding action against the Red Menace. "You're fighting yesterday's war," Patton might have said. "By the time you've built your Asian fortress, they'll have already taken it, and you would burn the world to save it." MacArthur might have countered. Strategy isn't about speed. It's about inevitability. Two philosophies of American power, one patient, one immediate, one believing in institutional strength, the other in kinetic force. Neither man lived to see his vision fully realized. Neither was entirely wrong. The clock ticks in empty rooms, artillery echoes across distant hills. And between their ghosts, the question hangs unanswered. When tyranny spreads like winter frost, do you contain it slowly or strike it down immediately? History would test both approaches. Korea would become MacArthur's war. The Eastern Bloc would vindicate Patton's fears. And the Cold War would prove them both prophets and both fools, depending on which decade you examine. What drives a general to prophesy doom? MacArthur's warning about Soviet domination of Asia wasn't born from paranoia. It came from pattern recognition, from watching how Moscow operated in Europe and seeing those same methods deployed across Asia. The Comintern's old networks, reactivated. Guerrilla movements, suddenly flush with weapons and ideology. Nationalist movements infiltrated and co-opted. He'd studied history, the great game between empires, the way powers expand into vacuums. Japan's defeat had created the largest power vacuum in modern history. 500 million people suddenly without masters, their futures unwritten. Into that void, two systems competed, American capitalism and Soviet communism. MacArthur understood that Asia's fate would shape the century. Control Asia, and you control the future's resources, populations, strategic depth. Lose Asia, and the Soviet Empire becomes unstoppable, encircling the world from Berlin to Beijing to the Pacific. But there's something deeper in his warning, something personal. MacArthur had spent his career in the Pacific, had shaped the Philippine Army, had returned like a conquering Caesar. Asia was his theater, his legacy. The thought of it falling to Moscow must have felt like watching his life's work dissolve. For Patton, had he lived, the warning would have meant something different. It would have been validation, proof that his wrong enemy thesis was correct. He would have seen MacArthur's Asian fears as the inevitable consequence of not striking the Soviets in 1945. In Patton's mind, every mile of territory the Soviets gained was bought with American blood wasted on the wrong battlefield. His response to MacArthur's warning wouldn't have been strategic patience. It would have been rage, at politicians, at fellow generals, at a nation that chose peace over preemptive war. "I told them," he might have said to the silence of his hospital room. "I told them this would happen." Two men, shaped by different wars but united in their conviction that the Soviet threat was existential. MacArthur's warning was analytical, institutional. Patton's would have been visceral, personal. Both understood that the alliance of convenience had birthed a monster that would haunt the world for half a century. The maps on their walls told the same story in different theaters. Freedom retreating, tyranny advancing, and American power caught between its ideals and its interests. The war Patton wanted never happened. The Asia MacArthur warned about fell partially into Soviet orbit, though not entirely, not permanently. History moved forward not with the clean lines of their visions, but with the messy compromise of reality. Korea exploded in 1950, validating MacArthur's warnings in blood and fire. He would fight his war there, pushing north until Chinese intervention drove him back, until his calls to strike China directly cost him his command. Patton's ghost whispered in every proposal to expand the war, to use nuclear weapons, to fight the larger enemy rather than the proxy. Eastern Europe remained behind the Iron Curtain. Patton's fears made concrete in barbed wire and watchtowers. The Soviet Empire he wanted to destroy in 1945 instead solidified, endured, threatened annihilation for 45 years. But empires built on terror eventually collapse under their own weight. The Soviet Union fell not to American tanks rolling into Moscow, but to economic exhaustion, ideological bankruptcy, the slow victory of the free system MacArthur helped build in Asia. Today, in rooms where strategy is debated, their visions still clash. When hawks demand immediate military action against rising powers, they channel Patton. When others counsel patience, institution building, long-term containment, they echo MacArthur. The debate never ended because the question never resolved. How do you face tyranny that hides behind the mask of alliance? Stand in the military cemeteries of Europe and Asia. Read the names on white crosses and stars of David. These are the men who died in the wars that followed the warnings. Korea, Vietnam, the countless proxy conflicts of the Cold War. Would Patton's war in 1945 have saved them, or merely added millions more? The generals are long dead. MacArthur lies in Norfolk, his legacy complex and contested. Patton rests in Luxembourg, among the men he led through hell. But their warnings echo still in every Pentagon briefing, every analysis of rising powers, every debate about when patience becomes appeasement. In the end, perhaps both men understood something essential, that vigilance is eternal, that tyranny never truly dies, that the price of freedom is constant struggle. They differed on timing, on method, on rhetoric, but on the fundamental threat, on the need for strength in the face of expanding totalitarianism. They spoke with one voice across the grave. The war they both saw coming arrived anyway, just not as they imagined. Cold instead of hot, decades instead of years, economic and ideological rather than purely military. But it was their war nonetheless, fought in their shadows, shaped by their warnings, won by doctrines they helped forge. And somewhere in the silent archives, their cables and letters wait, testaments to the burden of seeing clearly while others choose blindness, of speaking truth while others prefer comfortable lies. Two generals, separated by death and distance, both saw the storm gathering while others celebrated victory. Their warnings, MacArthur's analytical dread about Asia's fall, Patton's furious conviction that the wrong enemy survived, shaped an age they barely lived to see. History proved them both right and both wrong, as history often does with prophets. What remains is the haunting question they left behind. When evil wears the mask of alliance, when does wisdom demand patience, and when does it demand the sword? Their shadows still fall across every room where such decisions are made.